Gee, man.
Bastards!
Let's get to the real stuff. Talk about how Sonic falls in love with Metal Sonic. What the hell, man? And ponies? Are you serious? Gosh. Guys, come on. Hey, fucking ponies. Look, I'm going to do next
Ladies and gentlemen, is everybody comfortable and seated or standing as they please?
I saw that Knightrokon.
Ladies and gentlemen, we gather here today to mourn the passing of a longtime friend and companion.
Oh, you mean Final Fantasy 1?
Final Fantasy was a very close and dear friend to many and was loved by all.
Yay!
Sadly, Squaresoft disappeared those many years ago, and it is time for us to accept that Squaresoft will never ever again return. And this new Square Enix is never going to give us anything that we actually want. So instead, let us not dwell on the bad things of now. Let us instead look back and remember the wonderful times that we had with our Final Fantasy, our mini fantasies, and all of them were final in some way or another. So bitches, this is Final Fantasy for the win. Next slide. Seriously, okay, that's us. Here we go. We got James on camera.
I have never seen those
We got
guys.
Natsu.
I
We have Hannibal.
At all.
They're so deep. Okay. So deep. Gosh, I've got so much fatter since then. Okay. So basically, we're just gonna go over the Roman numeral stuff. We're not gonna go over Crystal Chronicles, Kingdom Hearts, Tactics, or Chrono Trigger, or as I like to say, the honorary Final Fantasy title. It was the same team.
What? What's wrong with Tactics?
What? Tactics is fantastic, but we're just not on this on
It's going good for this
time constraint wise. You have your own panel tomorrow to rip on Final Fantasy.
We plan on it.
You plan on this.
I know you plan on it. I'll be at that panel. You actually like
I thought this is what it was. We ripped on Final Fantasy.
So we're just going over the original numeric Final Fantasies 1 through 10, and the thing about the new you have to know about the numeric Final Fantasies is even though it's 1 through 10, there's no actual direct sequels in Final Fantasy.
X2.
Yeah. Oh boy, the best one. Anyway, there are no direct sequels in the Final Fantasy series.
Yeah.
What are you looking at?
I think they're high, dude. I think they handed out meth before it.
I don't know.
They should make a sequel.
So let's look at Final Fantasy, the first one.
Stick to the first 10.
The story. This is not the plot to Final Fantasy 1. In fact, Final Fantasy 1 had a very thin plot line to it. It wasn't so much the story that drove you in. It was the system. It was pretty basic RPG stuff. Like Final Fantasy 1 felt more like a D&D campaign on the computer or on the console that you did, and actually a lot of the way that the game played was more like, well, I'll get into the gameplay in a minute. But the thing is the story was pretty much go to this dungeon and get this thing, and then go over here, and maybe there's a king and fetch quests, fetch quests and stuff like that. It wasn't a
thing. Give it to the guy.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't so much about the story. The characters they weren't so much characters as they were just classes. Like nobody had a real voice or a real persona in the original Final Fantasy.
He was awesome.
Yeah. People want to come in.
And to the very tall people.
Oh, Attack the Titans. Hello, you are quite tall.
Oh my God.
Welcome to Final Fantasy. Yeah. Because the thing was, is you could select any 4 characters you want, and obviously, if you wanted to do the best party, you went with 4 white mages. You could select any 4 characters that you want because it didn't matter to the story what the characters were. Wow. You could just build your party the way you wanted to. Kind of like how most D&D campaigns go. Who cares about story? It's all about combat, right?
Yeah, those are guys from Street Fighter and
So let's get to the biggest thing.
They're about to die. That's the party's about to die.
Or no, actually, I think that's like the first fight. It's like one of the first fights you do. That's just what your HP is at the beginning.
No, not about to die. I'm thinking of the class choices. They're fucked.
They got a theme.
So yeah, so this is why I felt more like D&D. You start at a very low level, and the HP kind of feels like low D&D low level HP. You fight stuff, things that like I did. This was not my first Final Fantasy, so I apparently didn't realize I was crippling myself by playing this later. because I was expecting certain things like, oh, if I double select to a target and that target dies, they'll auto select a different enemy, right? Right? That's how that works. What do you mean you missed? So you have to plan a little bit differently in the things you do. They still yeah.
Back in my day.
This is where this whole setup. You'll notice this whole setup is what kind of kept them going for quite a long time. Where you have this screen and the characters over here, and the enemies over there, and your stuff, and you run your.
For a long time, it was a very effective HUD.
This worked so well all the way through the 16-bit era because it simplified things. You understood what was going on. You knew what to do, what you were capable of. The class systems worked really well, and it was just all around a really solid game. Now the interesting thing about Final Fantasy I is that Squaresoft at the time, hi guys, thank you tall people, is that Squaresoft at the time was basically a dying company. They were out of money. They were about to pretty much be liquidated as a company, and they had one last title that they were going to put out. So Final Fantasy, like they literally called it Final Fantasy because they're like, this is it. If this game fails, we're literally done. Yeah. And they made the game. It was released for the NES, and it boom, it sold everywhere. And this game literally saved Squaresoft. So whether you like the first game or not,
So much I've read it 14 times.
Buy it. This game pretty much saved Squaresoft so that it allowed them to create more. Pretty much. So now we go into Final Fantasy II. They made the sequel.
Dear Boy had a name, awesome.
And that's where the line
Starting to go the ones that most of us didn't really get to play until, I guess it was the Game Boy Advance started coming out.
Game
They
Boy
started
Advance.
making,
Wasn't this on the DS too?
I believe so. They started it everywhere. So PSP, some of these didn't come over to America until later when the ports came over because they're like, oh, Final Fantasy's the actual market in America. Oh, what do you mean they want? Oh, they want to play the other ones? Sure, free money. Why not? So, Final Fantasy II, the game's story centers around four thieves whose parents die during an invasion by this evil empire, Palamasi.
Oh, there's actually a story now.
Yes, they actually are like, hey, why do we have all this fighting? And actually make a compelling story behind it.
It's not just a dungeon crawl anymore.
Let's make them care!
I wonder if this will be a trend in Final Fantasies to have a really interesting story.
Yeah.
Maybe. We'll see what happens. It's fast enough.
So, it's a flip. 3 of the 4 main characters are rescued and join the rebellion against the Empire because, look, you just waltzed in and killed everyone we know. F you! And embarking on and then they pretty much go on these missions and get new magical weapons. They get more powerful so they can, just screw the Empire's day. And after defeating the Empire and the Emperor, after, raising this huge revolution against them, the trio discovered that the 4th kid that grew up in there, the group with them, had become a Dark Knight for the Empire, and it pretty much took the Emperor's place, and then he just summoned a demon destroyer the world. It's like, well, if I lose, nobody wins! Yes, because
the 4th grade response to video game parties.
Actually, or the Xbox Live version response to video game parties. Rage quit.
Just crash the server.
And pretty much, once the Emperor decides to rage quit, the 4 characters decide to try to defeat it. And the 4 characters from the beginning are Furion, and Maria, the guy which they changed to Gus when they remade it in the PlayStation, and then Monk who, and then Leon who is the Dark Knight, so you don't get to see from the game.
Oh, I thought you were.
Yay.
Whoops, I kind of went a little too far. There we go.
Those are the characters.
And we're done.
That's it.
See, they have the same system, but now the windows are blue.
Yeah, well, notice. No, they did make a remake of this called Dawn of Souls on the Game Boy Advance.
Which is the next slide?
And that's the next slide.
Which
If it wants to change.
Nope. Down.
And it's still not working.
Just like
Well, how about now?
Click on the screen so
It
that
never changes.
Oh my god, Nick.
There we go.
I didn't play this game, but I hear this happened a lot. This game
Oh,
was really,
yeah, no,
I heard this game was really goddamn hard.
One of the flaws about the gameplay on this was your stats only went up the more you used it. So obviously, your built-in melee character, the more he hit things, the better his accuracy and strength got. If you're an archer or a mage, the more you used magic, the higher your intelligence score got. And the only way to build your health is to get hit So if you actually knew what you were doing and killed people too quickly, you literally built glass cannons who couldn't take a hit.
Yeah, you were punished for being good at the game. You actually needed to be a little bit bad and get hit, so that you could be better at defense. You had to allow your enemies to hit you.
So like Super Saiyans.
Pretty much, incredibly counterintuitive.
Counterintuitive, and thankfully this is the only game that they really had this system for because they saw how bad it fit them in the butt.
Until Final Fantasy VIII.
Now, some of the things that Final Fantasy II brought to the table in Final Fantasies, it was the first to bring in chocobos, and lovable ostrich-like things, and the first one to bring in the recurring character Sid, the airship pilot. Everyone loves Sid. And also for combat, they implemented the back row, where your characters didn't do as much melee damage, but they had better defense. So obviously, where you're putting your spellcasters.
Yes. The back row was the greatest thing ever.
I love
the back row.
I love the activity-based progression of to experience, not so great.
I love that one.
And at the time when it was first released, they were planning a port to North America, but they canceled it due to the release of Super Nintendo, and they wanted to focus development on the Final Fantasy IV port, which they just renamed Final Fantasy II. Until we got smart, we're like, hey, we want these other ones. And next, FF3! Almost Final Fantasy I.
The reason it's almost Final Fantasy I is that they kind of went back to the roots of what they did with the first game. Not story-wise, there's still a story.
But gameplay-wise. Especially when it came to the experience development. They saw how poorly...
they saw that wasn't working.
The story, for example, 4 orphan
That's the
youths.
original graphics.
Yeah. Amazing what the Super Nintendo is possible of. How did Genesis survive?
I think I just dated myself by calling it graphics. Does anyone call it graphics anymore? It's not like I'm from the 90s.
No, they still call it graphics.
They still call it graphics? I thought they call it like CG now.
The story of this one revolves around 4 orphans drawn to a crystal of light. You'll see this, yes, this will get repeated over and over again.
Crystal of X elements. Happens a lot in Final Fantasy.
Orphan youths.
Walk into the light.
Insert element here.
Final Fantasy in the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull? Oh.
Yeah, like,
that belongs on the last panel.
The crystal grants them some power, and it makes them go forth to restore balance to the world. And you pretty much learned that 1,000 years ago, there was a floating continent, and they tried harnessing the light powers and ended up destroying themselves, and almost blew up the entire planet.
Floating continents and blowing up planets, another theme.
Another running theme in Final Fantasy. And pretty much is 4 Dark Warriors were able to save the world by using power of Dark Crystals to restore balance. So,
alright, talk about the gameplay.
Gameplay. Dark Crystals.
Another crossover.
Except with better voice acting.
That's another thing. There's like the light crystals and the dark crystals. That happens a lot, especially in the early ones.
Hey man, that's racist. Let's get that out.
Except for this one, he named Dark Crystals and ended up saving the planet. Go figure. Weird. And the 4 characters you played were Luna, the brave adventurous boy, Art, the smart kid who is Luna's best friend, Rifia, the blacksmith's daughter who runs away from home, and then Ignis, a soldier serving the king. And they're fighting against... Gameplay-wise, they brought back the original experience point system from the first Final Fantasy, because they saw how badly Final Fantasy II's action-related system worked. And this was also the first, for all those who love tactics, this was the first one to introduce a job system. And the slide won't change again.
You have to go over to this and then like click on it, and then it recognizes that you're in this again. So click on it.
Nope, that's not. I thought we had a picture of the jobs.
What?
There we go. The job setup.
Job class system.
Job class.
Looks like
That's not more characters.
And they brought in lots of new moves that would become kind of staples to this series. Like this is the first Final Fantasy where that the thief would actually have the steal action, so you could steal items from enemies, or the jump function associated with Dragoon.
Yes. We don't. We didn't make a tactics session for this panel, but I'm just going to blanket statement: tactics is awesome. It's a great.
Yes, tactics is awesome.
He'll talk about it tomorrow.
We'll discuss that tomorrow.
And also another staple that Final Fantasy III brought to the table was it was the first to introduce summons. So all the super powerful magic of I'm going to kill the boss now. Okay, he's going to avoid it. Final Fantasy IV. Sorry for this thing being a pain in the butt. Not wanting to change. There we go. Final Fantasy IV. Unfortunately, it's not Final Fantasy VI.
I agree.
It's close. Final Fantasy IV is a. Don't get me wrong. Final Fantasy IV is a fantastic game. It just pales in comparison to 6.
It's not. Like, you know, the rest of that series. It's not that they're
Whoa, whoa, whoa! Them fighting boys.
But they're chill.
And we'll recognize this scene. Final Fantasy IV is one of the darkest games I have ever played. The whole time going through this game, it's like, oh, okay, I've got this part together. I'm going through it. Oh my God, that person died. And you go through. Okay, you got a new party. Oh no, they're dead. Now Phoenix now died. They're dead. She's swallowed by the Leviathan. There's children turning into stone. Like it's the. So it's like Game of Thrones, like level of killing off characters. No one is safe in this show. If they had a Chrono Trigger moment, where the main character disappears too, it pretty much would have been directly like Game of Thrones. Like even the main character dies, ish. By the way, spoilers. In case anyone was concerned, I'm being completely insensitive to spoilers in this panel because did I spoil the 18-year-old game for you? My bad.
Unfortunately, they couldn't make Sean Bean.
And Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father.
Jumping out the window.
Also, the doctor's name is Steven or some bullshit.
I thought Darth Vader was in Slumdog Millionaire. What am I doing? Never watching Doctor Who again.
So the story was very good. Okay, the story in Final Fantasy IV was very good, but by Final Fantasy standards of stories, it was a little bit lacking than some of the other bigger titles that they have. Now the story was very compelling, but I feel like it used a tactic that was very I'm not gonna say cheap, but it was a more easy way to keep you invested. And that's they would introduce you to characters, they give them a little bit of development, and then they kill characters off. And they would use the sadness of killing characters off to keep you invested in the game. And I realized that it was more about characters that I kind of like dying more than me really being interested into the world and the universe and the story. That doesn't mean that the world and the universe wasn't interesting. It's just it wasn't as strong as other series were. So you get into the characters, and like I said, it's been a while since I played this game. I know there's okay. So you walk into a town like early on, and you don't realize you're the bad guy pretty much, and you just open up Pandora's box in this town and you murder everyone in the town, and you're like, oh my God, I didn't know that was going to happen. I thought we were delivering a cake to the mayor. Apparently, we were delivering all the demons. You have to destroy a monster in a tunnel just to get to this town at the beginning. You're like, what's this fucking summon monster? God, kill this summon. Screw that. Go into the town. Then you find out you meet this kid, you meet this child, and they're like, my mommy died because her summon monster died, and that made her too weak, and she got sick and died. Good. And you're just like, oh! That was completely not me, and that's terrible. By the way, here, look, I have a present for everyone in the and then everyone dies, and you basically started the game off, and you're like, oh my God, I'm such a dick, and I didn't even mean to be.
Just laugh at the kid.
The next half of the game is pretty much compensating for it's pretty much redemption for being Hitler in the first 5 minutes of the game.
That was when you were 14, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, even before he turned on you.
Yeah, and you get the child to join. You get the child to join you, and then she gets swallowed by a Leviathan later. But then she comes back, and she's older. What? Yeah. Yeah, it was like so all this dark stuff happened and people die, and there's a monk at some point and he kills himself because they needed another character to die, and then there's like an old mage who's really powerful, and then I get to his death scene was the worst, but not because it made me sad. Yeah, it made me a little bit sad. It was mostly like, oh my, it's like what he decides I have to solo fight the main enemy.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Why do you have to solo fight the main? Because it has to be me. This is clearly your death scene, and then I fight it out, and it does the scripted sequence, and I'm like, oh my God, he's dead. Oh my God, he's dead. I just gave him the best armor mage in the game like a minute ago.
And this would happen again.
Save state. Remove armor. Do that battle again. Yes, I cheated, and so do all of you. It's my loose black moment.
Did they try to cast Cure on him? They try to cast Cure on him,
do they? You can't save him. It's a scripted sequence. He dies.
Yeah, I know, but didn't they try to do Cure and then he wouldn't be back?
Like, oh yeah, like he wasn't willing to be cured or something. Like that.
Feeding some bullshit reason.
So basically, he didn't want to be cured, so his spell resistance was too high because he was your best mage.
Do the story.
Phoenix damage. I mean, how did anyone die in Final Fantasy?
Well, again, not the original graphics, it's a remod. This guy has to stay behind and sacrifice himself and die the monk character.
Wait, he had a mustache?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, the greatest muscle.
Yeah, mustache day.
Yeah, right? Black hair.
Apparently, she's wearing Wonder Woman's 90. You know,
And apparently you're playing the character out of Gaunts. You stole the Gaunts armor.
fighting shit. So Final Fantasy IV. Not bad. Pretty good game. Pretty good. Really good title. But as far as Final Fantasy goes, okay. So Oh yeah, there's a Final Fantasy V.
Yeah.
No one remembers this game. Did anyone play this game?
I love it. Here's another quick
question. Did anyone actually play Final Fantasy V?
I did.
Oh, a lot!
Oh, okay.
Wow. Black Jacobo. I love that thing.
We have to actually know things about this game now.
That's why I researched everything.
I'm glad you did.
name was Bud.
Butts, yeah.
Mark, man, Mark.
Let me guess. There's light. There's crystals.
Yep.
Is there a set of light instead of like dark crystals?
Yep. Airship. Four warriors. Four mystical warriors have to come and seal the big baddie with crystals. Yeah, they needed to hire new writers after the 5th one.
We need new stories.
We need new stories, guys. We're running out of ideas. The main characters were Bart's, and the main character Bart's, he starts off by investigating a falling meteor, and he runs into everyone else in the party, and that's when they find out about the 4 crystals that control elements. Surprise, surprise.
Elements of harmony.
And it acts as a seal. There's 4, not 6.
Prequel to Avatar.
Okay. The plot pretty much follows the group trying to prevent the followers of this evil cult from using the crystals to bring them back. And the features is it greatly expanded the job system that Final Fantasy III had, and also started to add the menu-based management system where you hit Y and bring up all the different menus. You can go through it and customize the loadouts. And you first also to use the ATB system, so like the initiative bar that you would see filling up before your character would attack, and so it allowed you to kind of better plan out how combat was going to go.
Which effectively it wasn't any different. The attack time base isn't really any different than turn time base as far as initiative is concerned. You can just see it. Like that's all which is useful because that's more information. You can see when your turn is going to come back up. But other than that, there's really not a difference between attack time base and turn base.
That you could edit it.
Edit it?
Yeah, like make it faster. Or
yeah, you could. Yeah, there's items that could increase.
Yeah, haste and slow and stuff.
No. Like you can go customize and make it slower.
Oh,
yeah,
I think so.
So to change the speed of combat. So like obviously if you're like lead, you're like hit maximum speed and I already know what to do. Whereas if you're new and you're trying to learn the system, what to use and whatnot, you could slow down the game so your enemies also wouldn't attack you as often.
You can tell when a veteran Final Fantasy player is playing because the battle is just screens opening and closing. You get like something that gives you double cast and mimic and all that stuff, and you just go. All right, I'm gonna get lunch. I'm won this battle.
Very good. You can use it as Morse code.
So the job system not only brought back all the old jobs. The job system not just brought back all the old jobs, but it added some new ones that all you tactics fans would probably know, called, you remember the Blue Mage and the Time Mage? Time Mages, so much fun with that. Yeah, they brought that in 5.
Note to self. All right, next Final Fantasy panel, we're putting tactics in. We want to talk about it so bad.
Tactics is amazing.
Tactics will be in the next panel.
And also for those of you that played some of the later entries, if you remember the boss Gilgamesh, this was the first combat.
Yeah.
Shall we do the rest of 6? Yes, we shall. And now I have to go over.
Came out randomly.
Oh yeah, stories.
I love this artist, this guy that did.
Oh, no,
Yeah, I think she was much longer. Is it a she? I think it might be. Really good book.
This is with the boots, right? The boots? She was naked, right?
in 16-bit they did or something.
That's enough for me.
Little squares.
I know. And it was like watching the movie channel.
And now it's time to discuss the best Final Fantasy title.
Surprisingly number 8. Surprisingly little. Everyone just like, yeah, you're right.
Wow, I can wait. Where are all the 7 tards?
There are no 7 stars in
You
here.
just said 6 is the best ever.
Oh my god.
I just said I'll repeat this for the Final Fantasy 7 nights. Final Fantasy 6 is the best title.
Yes.
Yes. Apparently everyone agrees.
I love this room.
Yes.
I never played 6, and then the poor FF4s over in the corner are like,
Two man ecstasy all the way.
I can understand. So, story.
I can't reach the window.
Okay.
Still waiting for the 3DS version.
Still waiting for the HD redo?
That's me.
But everyone
will make all the money.
It'll never happen.
Everyone keep asking
Basically, this story was too good for the system. Like they had the insufficient technology to express this incredibly intense and intricate story that they had to tell.
It's about the story, not the graphics.
I mean, they did absolutely they pushed the Super Nintendo to the absolute limit of what it can do, and did a great job with limited resources to express certain things. This is so much more impressive than Donkey Kong Country.
Donkey Kong Country is like is the calculator game. Give me your calculator you played during your math class compared to this.
Allegro? Donkey Kong Country's Allegro next to this.
So it's boxes. Yeah.